So as the years progress, I feel like more and more people are becoming a lot more sympathetic to the steroid users of the steroid era. And that is why I'm posing the question, will the Baseball Hall of Fame elect all the deserving steroid users as one giant class here in the future? Now, I'm not saying just anyone that used steroids is going to get in the Hall of Fame, but I'm talking guys like A-Rod, Sammy Sosa, Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, Gary Sheffield, those type of guys that were all slam dunk Hall of Famers as far as we knew 15, 20 years ago. And then of course all the stuff started coming out of steroid use and so forth. But that is why I'm posing the question of, do they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, or at the very least recognized in the Hall of Fame in some capacity? Because no matter how you feel about the steroid era, it was an era of baseball and it happened. It deserves to be recognized, even if it wasn't all positive when you look back at it in retrospect. We can't just forget the 15, 20 year span of baseball that went on. And yes, some of the records shouldn't hold up and so forth, but it still happened, and it was some of the most fun times in Major League Baseball. And that is why it's such a tricky question. Talk about these guys, do they deserve to be encased in the Hall of Fame with guys like Babe Ruth, Hank Aaron, Nolan Ryan, all these greats of the game that came before? But I feel like my generation is starting to take the helm of being a baseball writer, in which the baseball writers do vote on who gets elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And just for comparison's sake, I'm in my early 20s. So with that said, I feel like my generation is starting to take over as baseball writers, and eventually we're going to see more and more leniency to the steroid users of that era, just because in my era, it was normal growing up watching Barry Bonds hit monstrous home runs, you know, and Mark McGwire and A-Rod and Sosa and Clemens and Sheffield and so forth. It wasn't that weird. And no matter how you feel about the steroid use, a lot of these guys are still a lot of these writers' favorite players. It's going to be a real tricky situation of what do you do in this situation? You know, how do you approach possibly electing and or recognizing all of these, I guess, great steroid era players? Because it does deserve to be recognized, in my opinion, in some way. Because there's no doubting that A-Rod, Bonds, and Clemens, and there's probably a few more, would have been Hall of Famers probably without steroids. I mean, let's just think of that for a second. I mean, A-Rod probably could hit 400 home runs without steroids, probably even more, and been one of the best power hitting shortstops ever to play the game. Clemens had a lot of records, Cy Youngs and everything before the steroid use. Bonds too. So you can make the argument that, hey, maybe some of these guys deserve to go in the Hall of Fame, even though that they were caught using steroids. But I think more recognizing them and what they did in that era is more something that they may do eventually down the road, more than truly electing them into the Hall of Fame, because the Baseball Hall of Fame is quite the prestigious thing. If you've never really paid attention that closely on who gets elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame, it is way more exclusive compared to, say, the National Football League Hall of Fame, where Canton over there, they kind of just let anyone in. They let a lot more people in compared to, say, baseball, which I'm not faulting them for it. Cool, let more people in. Like, I'm not really, who am I to judge, you know, who gets into the Hall of Fame? But baseball is much more exclusive compared to football. And that is why I just don't see one big election class happening anytime soon. But it may happen eventually. Like I said, people my age, I believe, are much more lenient when it comes to the steroid use. Like when I talk to my friends about it, they don't really care that Bonds used steroids, or A-Rod did, or Clemens or Sheffield or whatever. They don't seem to be bothered as much as, say, someone like me. I look at baseball, I'm more of an old school guy. Yes, I do love the DH, but I'm more of an old school guy, I think, when I watch baseball and how I feel about baseball. It's tricky for me to say, yup, these guys deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, but people my age, I feel are more lenient and would like to see a Bonds, a Sosa, one of those guys get elected in the Hall of Fame. But it just does beg the question, how do you represent the steroid era in the Baseball Hall of Fame? And I think that is the trickiest questions of them all. Now, would I just be up in arms and just frustrated with the world if they did one big election class or something like that? Or even if they just let Sammy Sosa into the Hall of Fame, or Bonds or Clemens or whatever? I really wouldn't care. I really wouldn't. Yes, I don't think they really should be. I think the Hall of Fame should be more definitive, and I don't really want to use the word pure, but I guess for lack of better words, I'll use pure. You know, guys for sure that you know for sure didn't cheat, but at the same time, like, whatever, like it doesn't affect my life at all. It's not that big of a deal. So if it was to happen, cool, congratulations to those guys. They got in finally. I'm not gonna lose sleep over it. How about that? I'm not gonna lose sleep over the steroid era guys getting elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Still, at the end of the day, it is just baseball. It's just something to watch. It's a sport. It's really not that big of a deal, even though I love baseball to death. We just have to remember sometimes that it is just a game. And of course, there's a lot of things that go into this game that makes it great. But still, at the end of the day, it is just a game. And no, I did not really touch on too much about the records and stuff. That's a whole other tricky situation that I really don't know how to approach. Is Bonds really the leader of home runs? Maybe. Kinda. I don't know. Maybe. I don't really look at him as the leader of home runs. I think Hank Aaron still is. That's just how I feel about it. How valid is A-Rod's almost 700 home runs? I don't know. You know, how about Mark McGwire's 583 home runs? How do we look at that? I'm not sure. The records is the biggest thing to me about the steroid era that would be hard to assess when you want to elect these players. More than just the man himself and what he did for the game of baseball, but the numbers, because all baseball fans are so intrigued with the numbers. At least I am. I love the numbers of baseball. To me, that's what makes baseball so great, is the numbers and all the statistics and home runs and the average and hits and stolen bases and all that stuff. That's what makes baseball so great. And that's what kills this era, is because all these inflated numbers hurt all the numbers that came before it. It hurts what Babe Ruth did, Hank Aaron did, Willie Mays did. It hurts what Nolan Ryan did, Cy Young did, insert other great pitcher. It just really detracts from the greatness that came before. And I think that is the biggest issue everyone has with it, is it makes it impossible to assess how great these players were in that given generation compared to other generations. Because that's one thing great about baseball, is you can look at statistics and you can be like, yep, Babe Ruth was great and he'd probably be great in any generation. Where it's hard to look at the steroid era guys where you're like, I don't know, how to assess the situation. Would Barry Bonds beat out Babe Ruth in a home run contest or something like that? Like, it's hard to assess, and I think that's what makes it so difficult. So what would I like to see happen? One giant election class, some type of representation in the Hall of Fame. I've said a lot of things in this video, but I'm really not sure. Like I said, I wouldn't lose sleep over it if they did have one giant election class and let all these guys in. I'd be like, cool, at least this era is represented. It has its own moment, its own area. That'd be fine. But at the very least, I do think this era should be represented in some way or another. Yes, we just talked about the stats and stuff that could be inflated, but some of these players provided for some of the greatest moments of a 20-year span in baseball. And no matter if they cheated or not, it should be represented in the Baseball Hall of Fame, because there's no going back now. It did happen, and it deserves to be remembered, at least in some capacity. So with that said, let me know your thoughts on this whole topic down in the comment section below. Would you like to see one giant election class, some type of representation, or would you like to see these players just get elected one by one per the usual format? I want to know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. Until next time, guys, everyone have a great day. Thanks for watching. Peace out.